I could take questions, but instead I think we should just go directly to the opportunity to ask questions of both me and also the other members of the Racket leadership, Matthew and John and Robbie, who are here. So if you can, there's only one, there's maybe a few chairs. So happy to answer questions either about the Racket Foundation, about tree lists, about the demodularizer, about any other aspects. Yeah, about when we're releasing 8.15. Yeah, so happy to answer questions. Maybe sit over there. The light is a little painful, but. Jacqueline.
Can we release faster? No. Do you want to help?
So
I could be convinced.
So I think the big thing that stands in between us and releasing faster is the amount of manual effort that goes into releases. And that's mostly testing effort, but there is, of course, other work, and it's really, so I would say, and John, you can correct me, if there's both a coordination aspect and work aspect, and both of those take a lot of time that John puts into it, and which is why he doesn't want to do it even more times a year.
I should have a better answer. That's not yeah. No is not a good answer.
You do a good job.
Well, no, but that's not the question. Thank you. I'm sorry I have no brains because you're looking at me, and I should give you a more thoughtful answer. I'm sure there are ways that we could streamline the process and also incorporate help from you and other community members. Maybe can I first ask what the benefits of that would be?
If I change something in Racket so that resyntax can refactor stuff better, I don't have to wait 4 months for that to start happening.
Right. 3 months. Actually, wait. Yeah. You want to go to, oh, wait. Are you proposing only 3 times a year?
Well, it depends when I get it in.
That's true. You're right.
That's it.
I mean, I guess maybe, but seriously, right? So this is a town hall, right? I mean, is there other feedback? I mean, seriously, if y'all as self-nominated representatives of the Racket community are as one in a tidal wave of insistence on releasing 8 times a year, then I.
No. I just uploaded 8:11 2 minutes ago, so it doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
We can make it easier to upgrade, and that will also make us faster.
Yeah. So what's that? What does that look like for you?
I feel like sometimes I have to muck around with my package, the install packages in weird ways to get things working.
Yeah, I would love to hear from more people about that. I know there's a lot of discussion, and my reaction to that discussion is always like, well, I always start fresh and with a newly downloaded version, and I run this one shell line that's I paste it from my buffer that's like Racket package install. Oh yeah, all that stuff I need, and it all gets installed. But is that? I think that probably doesn't work for everybody, and I'd be curious to know why or whether that could be improved.
The way to do that?
I've never actually used Racket package migrate, so yeah, because I've always just felt like I just install the things I need and now I'm up again. But maybe I'm doing it wrong.
I've never had a problem with migrate.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, migrate's nice.
So maybe there's a conversation. No. Maybe something needs to happen, right? That's a conversation that needs to happen, and I'm not even a part of it.
I've never had like a problem with migrate, but I guess because usually I use Racket for like courses and such. So I'm always surprised whenever like I have Racket installed and then 6 months later when in a different course it doesn't work because my Racket updated and it just like automatically runs Racket package that acts migrate. So like it's easy to run it, it works, but that you have to run it is always a little surprising to me.
Yeah, I mean, by contrast, though, look at where you live. It's for at least where I live with Python, right? Where it's like, no, and I don't mean Python is bad.
Let's
here.
hold
I just
ourselves
mean-
to a little higher standard. I do think one other piece of the release, migration, et cetera, puzzle is building more tooling around the installation and upgrade process. And if you use, and I've been trying to do this more, if you use the Raco cross tool, like stuff just sort of automatically works really nicely. And I think one thing we could do is to make that be more people's default workflow the way it is in other languages like Rust or Haskell, where tools like that are the default way to install things.
What is Raco Graph?
It's a
Maybe I'm the only
tool
one who's never
for installing various versions of Racket and running Racket, running particular versions that you have installed. Yeah.
Question from the live stream. What's a good way for someone to start contributing to the community? Are there any good starter repositories? I guess in the core Racket.
So
Does Stephen have a list?
I think there's a wiki page which lists some good places to start. I think there's lots of different places to contribute if you want to write compilers or GUI apps or do language design or write tooling. There's going to be different places to start. But yeah, I think the resources that Stephen DeGabriel maintains are the best places to look for that. Yeah. One of the things he's done is there's some GitHub labels for issues to look at, and of course, pointing to such issues is also a good, useful thing to do.
Sort of related to the releases question or topic, how do you all decide when it's necessary or appropriate to do like a major version upgrade?
So we've done, we've sort of 8.
We could step back and say, why did it become 8 and why did it become 7 and so on? And it's just sufficient milestones where there's too many versions for me to keep track. Like if you say 8.3, I don't know what was in 8.3. So sometimes we need bigger mileposts. So 7 was when we changed the macro expander, and 8 was when CS became the default instead of the old Racket compiler. So it's really milestones that we need to keep track of sort of generally and be able to easily say, oh no, things really changed from that to that. So it's definitely a judgment call. So 15 is probably the highest we've gotten to in as a dot, but we don't have a reason at the moment. You know, there's incremental improvements, so no at this particular time.
So you were saying that the 9 is going to be when you switch to Rhombus.
Or there will be Rhombus 1.0 and Racket, whatever. I don't know. I don't know how that goes.
Yeah, over the last few have been situations where if you download 8.0, it might by default behave differently in some important way. And the same was true for 7.0, and the same was true for 6. I forget what 6.0 was about.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah,
Yes,
6.0 was about the package system, and so there were a number of pieces, like the default thing that you get by going to download.racketlang.org changed in a meaningful way for each of the major releases, and I think if that happens again, then we'll go with 9.0.
Yeah, can you talk more about tree lists and like how they compare to, I guess, like vectors in particular?
Sure. So tree lists are an implementation of RRB trees, relaxed radix balanced trees. So they're one of many wide trees indexed by bit strings. So RRB trees were developed by T.R. Grumpf and Phil Bagwell. So that's, and they're used in a variety of other languages. So they're the primary data structure for, it's used in Scala as well, I think. Closure lists are not RRB trees, but they're a different data structure. They're an earlier data structure invented by Bagwell. And then mutable ones, Matthew can explain how they work.
Mutable ones are immutable ones, but in a box, mostly. There's a small shortcuts, but basically that's it.
Okay, yeah. So that was, and that question was, can you say more about tree lists? Does that answer your question about tree lists? Okay.
Do car and cutter work on tree lists the way you should?
Yeah, car and cutter work. They take, the question do car and cutter work on tree list? Yes. I think they're called,
I just tried, so that's
I think they're called, do car and cutter, you mean, no, there's tree list first and tree list rest. So they behave in an analogous way, but no, a tree list is not a list.
Yeah. The other thing to say to compare tree lists to vectors, which you also asked about, is tree lists are a tree, whereas every vector in Racket is always a single piece of contiguous memory. And tree lists are built on top of vectors, but so like leaves are not single elements, but vectors of elements. But it is there is tree traversal to get to any individual element.
Question about the demodularizer. So in that case where you're using it for a library, presumably you're not removing any dead code if the library, you're exporting everything. You have all the code that you need in the library to implement the export. So it's about removing direction, allowing inlining.
Okay. Yeah, so the question is, when you use the demodularizer on a library that's going to export a bunch of stuff, functions and macros and so on, those things are not dead code mostly, especially if you have macros, they may expand to other things that are in the library. So how does that work? Is that the question? Yeah, so the answer is it does treat things that are exported as live. And when you have macros, then by default, it just treats everything as live. But there's a flag you can provide, an option you provide that says, actually, my macros are never going to make up crazy names. They're only going to refer to things that they literally refer to. So if there's some local function whose name is never used in quote, underquote syntax in the expansion, you can prune that as well. So it's a combination of being able to prune those things, being able to prune things that live in the wrong phase, and so they can't possibly be referenced. That's rare, but that can happen. These flags and some analysis that it does that further prunes things. Some of it is getting rid of code, and that's what makes the big difference, but also just removing the boundaries and allowing endlining to happen, and things like that also tend to reduce things, and more of your macros go away If you're not exporting any syntax, which is somewhat common, then it can prune even more.
Just to say one more thing there, the phase point that Matthew made is actually significant because say you import racket/list for syntax, then you can prune. You don't need to, even if you're keeping around a macro that uses the third function, you don't need to keep around the 14th function at phase 1.
Yeah, so Robbie's pointing out that some of it is just getting rid of code, and some of it is the fact of collapsing everything into one file that can be loaded, and the module system doesn't have to do its transitive requires and transitive instantiations.
Sam?
Does the demodularizer remove contract boundaries?
Question is, does the demodularizer remove contract boundaries? No, it don't. The expansion still has drawn the line, and so that would be preserved.
I probably won't use the demodularizer myself, but I imagine it could be quite useful in the standard library. And if that's the case, how will I see performance changes in the standard library?
So the question is, the demodularizer sounds like it might be applied to some of the standard libraries. What sort of differences can you expect? Since a lot of the savings comes from avoiding the transitive requires and so on, it has to be a pretty big standard library to pay off. So right now, I don't think we're using it anywhere. The demodularizer actually followed on some other improvements that collapse requires and avoids a transitive traversal in favor of linear traversal. So that's sort of automatic, and it turns out your Racket started up a little faster in the recent versions. The big use case naturally is Rhombus. So Rhombus is implemented in hundreds of modules. And you don't really want to have to do the transitive requires on that hundreds of tightly connected modules. And so collapsing it down is one thing. So it's intended for very large libraries like that. I think, Sam, you were considering maybe it might make sense for typed Racket.
Yeah,
that's the sort of scale where it could make sense.
So the other thing to say is that if anyone ever requires something from inside the library, the middle of your library that you demodularized, then using the demodularizer will break that program in some way that they won't be sharing the same function. And like if they're just two different implementations of the 14th function, then that's not so bad. But if they're two different structure types, then your program doesn't work at all. So it's important. So that's one reason why you couldn't use the demodularizer on Racket base, for example, is that lots of people have written programs that require individual supposedly internal pieces of Racket base, and changing the behavior of those programs would be problematic. Using it for typed Racket might be more reasonable because requiring some piece of the type checker doesn't get you anywhere. And so it's potentially doable there. There's, of course, tricky aspects to building anything like that, but it's something that could be useful in typed Racket.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I answered what performance effect does it have. It's mostly startup time. It's mostly about reducing startup time. There can be some runtime effects by recompiling after everything's flattened together, but startup time's the big one.
Yeah. The other place besides Rhombus where I think there's the most applicability is for tools where you want fast startup time. So I tested with a little command line tool that I use all the time that goes to wherever the implementation of a particular module path is, and you can cut the latency of that command about in half using the demodularizer.
Pulling the demodularization breaks, I find really interesting. You were showing an issue where we demodularize one big artifact and we have to consume that wholesale. Did you want to explore or look at, is there a way to produce a singular artifact that still presents multiple namespaces?
So the question was, you can, when you demodularize something, then it's collapsed to a single interface. Did we look at supporting multiple interfaces out of the same collapsed set of modules? The answer is yes, and Rhombus has to do that. So submodules are the answer there, really. So you use hashling compiler demod on your module, but you have submodules that export other subsets or additional things. And so Rhombus, the Rhombus one, for example, has a dozen or two such submodules to present different interfaces. So.
Forgive me, I'm returning to an earlier portion of the conversation, and I regret not bringing it up then. I have just a quick question for people about package managers and the package managers that they use. Right now, well, at least one of our managers is really horribly behind, and hopefully we can repair that. But I am curious to know whether people are generally speaking, and I'm sure Stephen, as Gabrielle has constructed a survey, and I'm probably just ignoring it here, what package managers people are actually using to install Racket and I know I shouldn't ask this part, but if there's anything that's obviously missing, or like, does anybody miss the Ubuntu PPA, or is everybody just using Snap and Flatpak instead? I guess I don't really know the answer to that.
I missed the Ubuntu PPA.
Yeah. Okay. You missed the Ubuntu. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I would really love for Ubuntu PPA.
Okay.
Because
Yeah.
the Snap has auto installation and stuff like that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So the Snap has. Yeah. I can't repeat all of this. I'm not gonna try.
Sophia?
This morning I did Racco package install -- binary lib Racket lang server, which one, I shouldn't have to remember to type -- binary lib, and two, when you do this, it says I can't give you this conversion. It doesn't explain what a conversion is or why the built packages aren't available by default. That seems odd to me.
I'm not the one to answer this question, unfortunately. I know I look like I would be the right person, but I'm not.
So one thing that's so the question was, why can't you get binary versions of most packages, without docs, without tests, and without getting the source code and so on? It's the source of that difference is because the Racket package manager doesn't actually have the packages. It is the package server is just telling you where to go get them. Now we do have a package build service that does build them, and so you can point your Racket at that package source, and then these things will tend to work more often. Well, they should work. The problem is that is a huge other service that we're having to maintain now. And we're getting better at it. It's improved recently because we put it on a different machine, sort of set it up differently. If that one day gets to the point where it's stable enough that it makes sense for people to use it, then it could become like the default and we could support old versions and so on. But this is where we run up against the limits of the people who do keep the lights on and how many light switches we can flip. So.
Well, I just wanted to say, I didn't actually know the Flatpak or the Snap version of Racket actually existed until today. So maybe you could do a better job advertising them or pointing them out as additional options.
On the other hand, they don't work that well, so.
Oh, okay, right. Well, so the question is, can or should we do a better job of advertising things like the Snap and Flatpak version? And all I can offer in response to that is, yesterday I found out about this really awesome trivial package from Ben Greenman that apparently has been around since 2015. So there's lots of things like that, and I don't even know what that looks like. Organizing. I think we have some people. Yeah.
And to write a description of the package of the option.
So more seriously, there is a recommendation to some of these on the download page, and if you visit the download page on a Linux machine. And I think there are genuinely some challenges with the ways that the Snap and Flatpak security models and like programming languages, and particularly the way Racket is implemented, they don't play perfectly nicely together. So there's some challenges there, and like I tend to encourage people to just download the normal way. But it is advertised, yeah, but I'm sort of ambivalent about that advertising because it doesn't always work great.
Mentioned on the download page, I see that now, yes, thank you.
Jason?
If I'm just going to curl or wget the shell script, is there a consistent URL that I can use that will always give me whatever the latest version is?
Yes, I think so.
I think there is, but I'm not 100% sure. So the question was, is there a URL that will always give you the current release? I think if you put some part of that path, if you replace the version with current, I think we have the redirection set up, but it's hard to.
Yeah, so take a look at what setup Racket by often do.
Oh yeah, Sorry points out, take a look at what setup Racket, the GitHub action that Bogdan made does. So does that work on versions or by snapshots or versions?
It's a possible.
Okay, it supports both. Great. Yeah.
A few comments on releases and installation on the live stream. Rust has a 6-week rapid release process. Others say 4 times a year is plenty, but sometimes the delay between the freeze and the release can often take a while. So maybe the question is, can that be shortened in some way? Maybe we'll look at that question.
Yes. So I think those are actually the same question. As it turns out that Rust has a much more frequent release process.
Well, it came from the live stream, right?
So the Rust has a much more frequent 6-week release process, in large part because the things they do to release are all automated, and things that they do as part of their continuous integration system. Whereas the things that take a long time in that freeze to actual release process are the things that Racket does that are not as automated, which includes things like builds on a wide variety of different platforms, code signing, and other testing things, testing packages. So there's it is the amount of work that gets done between when John sends out the email saying that the release process is starting and when the actual release happens is both why that's a long time and why John doesn't want to do that any more times per year.
Right. I do think there are certain things that could be telescoped a little bit, maybe to save a week here or there, for sure.
And then Stephen has the results of the survey.
Oh yeah. See, okay. Yes.
70% use the official installer for download of Racket.org. 47% use the OS installer, or I guess an app cache or a specific installer. And 17% use third-party Snap, Flatpak, Homebrew, etc.
This is a meta comment about that. Stephen DeGabriel is a
Gentleman
fantastic
scholar.
person that we are very lucky to have as part of our CURP community. Yes.
I guess as far as like package distributions go, I just use Racket from Pac-Man, which is pretty consistently updated, which is nice. I don't know if that's just because there's like 4 consistent releases per year. But for the other languages I use that have like less consistent or like less frequent or more frequent release schedules, most of them have some sort of like rest up style installer thing that is just a program that you install and it updates all of your language installation for you and handles what's on the path and whatnot. I don't know if like Racket Cross is, or Racket Cross or whatever is kind of something that does that, but that's just kind of
Yes. So Rako Cross implements roughly the hard parts of RustUp, but not the path manipulation and like setting up the binaries to do the right thing. So I think that would be, building a tool like RustUp on top of Rako Cross would be a valuable thing to do.
Configuring the path can be done using Racket.
It's under the help menu.
Yeah, which is like super obscure. Yeah, it's bad.
Another light stream question. What is the target of your zero?
Sorry, the question from the live stream is, what's the target of Zoa, the language? Yeah, it's just to build Racket and Chez scheme, and it may seem crazy to have a whole language just to build the builds, and so on. But yeah, as a bootstrapping thing, it has worked great. Even the Chez scheme, people were willing to put up with it, and Andy's nodding happy. I'm very pleased about that because I worried about that. But that's it. If it's useful for something else, then great. It might be useful for some embedded scheme-like things. But.
What's the future relationship between Chez scheme and Racket? Chez owned by Cisco.
The question is, what is the future relationship between Chez scheme and Racket continuing as now? We will continue to build on Racket, and I will continue to contribute to Chez scheme as well. I don't think the fact that it's owned by Cisco, as far as copyright goes and so on, it's open source. We can continue to build on it no matter what happens. Andy's confirming that too.
Yeah, I mean, Cisco, as far as I know, doesn't make active use of it anymore. Frankly, most of us who are using it there are no longer at Cisco. But we sort of made the decision as part of the maintainers for Chez scheme that it was worth it to leave it under their umbrella just so that we had a good place.
Yeah, so just to repeat for the live stream, Andy Keeper was saying, relating how we decided to keep it under the Cisco umbrella to let them, to keep the repo in the same place, but we get to keep working on it. There's no obstacles there.
Can we get Racket screen threads to run in parallel now that we're on Cisco and we're on Chez scheme that's been pretty stable?
The question is, should Racket thread run in parallel? I mean, that changes the semantics too much to do it just like that. So I think it's version 9. I'm still in the camp of thinking it's useful to distinguish concurrency and parallelism, so I would look for other alternatives. I know it explodes. If I turned it on, then I/O would all lock up and go bad, and yeah, it definitely wouldn't work to just change the meaning of that.
Just to say one other thing about parallelism and Chez scheme, the move to Racket CS significantly increased the ability to make use of parallelism via futures. And I think the most plausible directions for increasing the applicability of parallelism in Racket programs are that we could continue increasing the number of things that work smoothly with futures, and we can continue, and then there's the potential for better integration between Racket's mechanisms for concurrency and Racket's mechanisms for parallelism. And I think there's definitely work that's possible there without trying to change thread to run in parallel.
We ran out of questions. All right.
Well, thanks everyone.
Yep.
Thank you, Sid. Thank you everyone on the live stream. Thank you everyone here. Thank you to the organizers, and it's been a great RacketCon.